Okay, should be live now. Welcome back. End of the week, last stream for the week before I go and take at least a break, a short break anyway. But don't panic. I want you to chill out. I want you to calm down. 1D&D has been causing a lot of discussion, and frankly, I've found it bleeding over into other videos and comments, which I'm like, the video is not actually about 1D&D. How is it that the conversation has gravitated to that topic when the video isn't about that? so I didn't really expect that to be the case. So I'm going to say, again, don't panic. I'm going to put up a poll, and I'm going to go through this, a lot of the things that people have been concerned about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break them down. I'm going to take my time. This is not supposed to be a scaremonger thing. there seems to be an awful lot of that going on. Hi, Big Kid. How's it going? Hi, Mike. Hi, Josh. How are you doing? By the way, Dungeon Master Josh has a YouTube channel, and you should go and check him out sometime. Yeah, it is a play test, but I mean, I've had some interaction with Wizards of the Coast in terms of playtesting. Dinomance is a patron. Welcome. Now, so I'm going to pull out my earplugs. I'm going to take a drink of water. You will see me pausing a little bit in here as I start and stop my camera for recording at this end. And you will also see me stopping to drink water because apparently I lip smack too much, which I can understand, but I get very dry and I talk for a long time. Okay, and I should also mention there is going to be a Dungeon Master Roundtable on Esper the Bard's channel in about 2 hours. Okay, so now let's get down to 1D&D, and I have some slides for you because I always do, don't I? That doesn't mean I'm not going to bring it back to my face, because I absolutely will, but I couldn't help putting this together last night for those of you who needed it. I thought this was perfect for you. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I want to talk about 1D&D. And I'm going to say first, before I get into this, saying don't panic and everyone loses their mind. Like the quote from Heath Ledger's Joker just stands out for me. Because of course, that's not what's been going on. There's been a lot of panic around the new playtest material, and I think you need to understand what's going on. We have been here before. This is not the first time. Nothing that they're saying is actually very different to what they've said in the past. I would also like to point out that this is 1D&D. This is a playtest. Like, they are testing things. The question about whether it's a legitimate playtest, I'm going to get to that, okay? So what I've decided to do is to rectify some of the craziness on the internet, which apparently this is how you make a little bit more money. Instead of being able to make only a couple of cents, you can make maybe $10, $20 by making things a bit more sensational, which is like, this is how we do things on the internet nowadays, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to answer these questions. So I'm going to tell you what the questions are, and then I'm going to answer them one at a time. Will this be the end of Dungeons and Dragons Ed editions? Like, this has been there's no more Ed editions. There's just 1D&D, okay? I'm going to address that particular question. Is the 3D virtual tabletop going to change D&D forever? Because that has certainly drawn an awful lot of attention from across the internet. So I'm going to address that as well. I'm going to talk about the D20 test, the terminology and how they are bundling it. I want to talk about that as well. I want to talk about rolling a 1 on a D20 and it being an automatic failure. I want to talk about that as well, since that seems to be a topic that's coming up a lot. I want to talk about rolling a 20 on a D20 dice, which now is a automatic success. Okay, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about critical hits because that has been very contentious and a lot of people have wanted to say quite a lot about it, and I understand, so we're going to talk about critical hits. I'm also going to talk about inspiration because that seems to be another thing that's been a sore point for more than a few people. I'm also going to go into a lot of detail. Like, I have many, many notes on every section, so this is why I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to talk about the unarmed strike, which means we're going to talk about unarmed strikes and grappling and shoving and sort of how that works. I'm going to talk very briefly about the long rest, and then I have some miscellaneous rules changes, which is actually very tiny. In comparison to everything else, that is nothing in comparison to the notes that I've taken on things. I have anywhere from 10 to 11 points on many of these aspects that I'm going to talk about today. So this is why you need to definitely settle yourself in, okay? This is not my normal stream where I do a presentation and then when I've finished my presentation, I then go to the chat. I am probably going to pause a little bit and take my time with this because I'm going to need to. So let's work with the first task at hand. Because I am not new to playtesting for Wizards of the Coast at all. And if you are aware, my name is actually in the Monster Manual, which means I've been part of the alpha playtest, not just the beta playtest, but the alpha playtest for what you now call Dungeons and Dragons 5e. So I'm aware of how they operate. So let's suck it up and let's answer the first question that people seem to have. One D&D. Will this be the end of Dungeons and Dragons editions? Like, this is what Wizards of the Coast is saying, is that there's no longer going to be any kind of edition. They are trying to avoid an edition war. And every time there is a new book that comes out, new core books, there's a war between those who like the idea of having changes and those who don't want the changes and want to stay with the old thing. Okay. So will this actually be the end of D&D editions? No. It's been said by Wizards of the Coast every time the game is reprinted. Okay, every single time Wizards of the Coast has done this, they've always said this is the game to rule them all. This is the only game there will be. And of course, the concept of revisions has been discussed and usually highlighted. But this is essentially marketing propaganda. It's normal process. It's nothing new. They've done it when we were dealing with the version 3 of the game. They did it with 4E. They did it when we were leading into 5E, and they're now doing it with 1D&D, which is basically the sixth version officially, but actually there's probably about 12 or 13 versions of the game ultimately in the end. There are a lot of game mechanics, if you haven't noticed, that are changing. Like from 5e, you can see that there's actually been quite a bit of change. What is essentially the same, though, which you need to take into consideration, is that the D20 or 20-sided dice roll mechanics are essentially remaining the same. They are at their core. You have attack rolls, you have saving throws, okay, and then you have ability checks. And they've always existed in some form. The skill check is just another type of ability check. That's all it is. Okay, so skills certainly came into the game later on, but in terms of the history of the game, those things have essentially stayed pretty much the same. We may have dealt with them differently, but they were always kind of there. Now, this is most certainly going to be the 6th version of the game. It's not 5.5. I can assure you that Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was 5.5. This was testing the waters. It was put out as being a rule expansion or adjustment that was optional. But truthfully, it was not optional because, as you can see, they are hard baking and have been, since they put it out, hard baking it into every book that they now publish. So 5.5 has been and gone. We are now moving into a completely new animal. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, I think you might find that 1D&D might actually come up with some better basic game mechanics. Now, this is my opinion, and I will present my case, but I think you might find that you might get some better basic game mechanics. Now, do I think that how they deal with races and backgrounds and classes is going to get better? Not necessarily at all. because they are following the codified system which sells money. The more rules you make, the more you can sell to a consumer. And so that's what they're doing. And they've kind of been doing that from the very get-go. This is how Wizards of the Coast works. And frankly, TSR would have done exactly the same thing. In fact, they did, because they had released Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so codifying the game is something that has been going on from the very get-go. It certainly wasn't necessarily something that Dave Arneson was wanting to adopt, but it's certainly something that Gary Gygax was all for, and he saw the value of doing it because it would make more money. Now, everybody else coming after that are just jumping on the same bandwagon. Now, the normal playtest cycle for Wizards of the Coast it's actually 2 weeks. This is the kind of time frame they gave us for the basic rules and the monster manual when we were dealing with D&D Next. Okay, so you would get it. You would be expected to try and test everything they gave you, which was usually far too much, in 2 weeks, and then they would collect data. The good thing in this case, now that it's public, is they have actually allowed you 2 weeks to collect the data. Often we had less than a week to collect data when we were alpha playtesting behind closed doors while nobody could actually see what we were up to. Okay, that's my experience as part of the Dungeons and Dragons Next alpha playtest, not the beta test. The beta test was public. The alpha playtest was a product of closed doors, and not everybody was invited. I got roped into it because I had a mate who got very friendly with Mike Mills, and so therefore I wound up part of this process. And I was running a lot of games at the time, and I was happy to test it all out. Because, well, kind of. Anyway, so that's that aspect of the testing in terms of editions. This has always been going on. The reason that the public testing now for 1D&D is now come out is probably because right up from the beginning of the year, they've had private playtesters working through what they want to actually release. They probably had a basic idea of what they were going to do. They did some testing behind closed doors. They said, okay, now we're ready to see what the public thinks. At this point, what we're dealing with is a playtest which is not a true playtest. It's not like we're just starting at the ground roots. It's a marketing playtest. Okay? So what does that actually mean? That means, and this was actually very much the case I found with the alpha playtest, and that is the current playtest material it's not a true playtest because and Wizards of the Coast does this a lot. Like it's not uncommon. It's not new for them at all. What they've already done is they've set out their path. They pretty much know what they want, and now they are testing it. They are going to make adjustments. They're going to make adjustments based on feedback. And that's more for marketing. Can they sell this to the public and they will be happy and they won't diverge any more than they have? And so the only feedback that will be effective with regard to this, since it's a marketing playtest rather than a true game advancement playtest, although there are aspects to that, not all of it, but certainly there are some, your voice needs to be loud and it needs to be negative. If you aren't loud enough and you're not negative about something, then it probably won't change. Okay, if your voice is loud and it's positive, good Lord, like how many times can you slam the door? Okay, so even though somebody's slamming the door in my house, Wizards of the Coast hasn't actually completely slammed the door in your face with regard to the Dungeons and Dragons rules. If you make enough noise and it's negative, they will reconsider. Okay, if your voice is very small and it's not negative, then they will probably leave it alone. That's generally how Wizards of the Coast marketing works with regard to anything that they do. The game. Is this game actually going to be backward compatible? Okay, so, well, no, not really. In a way it is, and in a way it isn't. The game of 1D&D and whatever you get in 2024 will be as backward compatible as any other edition of Dungeons & Dragons, except potentially 4E. 4E is probably a little bit hard to go backward compatible on. There's way too much you need to adjust. So what that really means, that's the theoretical side of things. What it really means is no, whatever you get is not going to be backward compatible without major adjustments. Now, even the adventures won't be completely backward compatible because they won't be able to deal with the power level. You'll have to adjust monster abilities. You'll have to switch them out. Not only that, you'll have to change the number of monsters. You'll probably need to make adjustments to how they work to actually challenge players when you're playing older, pre-published adventures put out by Wizards of the Coast. All of your race stuff, all of your character stuff, all of your background stuff is going to be obsolete because there'll be so many changes taking place that they won't marry up. So yes, the good thing is you'll find that all of the fluff that you have, all of your campaign guide fluff is backward compatible because all of the stuff that's ever been put out that was fluffy and was lore-like is always backward compatible. You can use it or not use it, and you don't have to worry about game rules. That's the great thing about lore. So does that answer the question with regard to, is this going to be the end of yet editions? Absolutely not. The next question. Can I just say that I have some colleagues in the YouTube community who are extremely irresponsible when they talk about the three-dimensional virtual tabletop. They've made bucket loads of money by making those videos, but it is totally irresponsible. And I'm going to tell you what the deal is with the next one. Okay, here we go. I know this is one that really has struck a hard nerve with people, so I will deal with that. It's kind of unfair too in so many... Dark and Smith, hello, welcome. Fry Minis, hello Eric, welcome back. And Eric Fry Minis does a channel that talks about miniatures. You should go and check him out. And I'm going to now talk about the virtual tabletop and all of that comes with that. Right. Let's press that record button. Let's go back to my notes. I have a lot of notes, by the way. Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Eric. I do appreciate it. Now, let's talk about the next thing. 1D&D now has, in development, not finished, a 3D virtual tabletop. So, the question is the 3D virtual tabletop going to change Dungeons & Dragons forever? I think the concept is that it's going to lock away everything, that you'll have to buy into this thing, it's going to cost a lot of money, that people's imagination will diminish, that it will put everybody else out of business, and that it'll be, it'll be basically making Dungeons & Dragons a Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast IP, and that's the only place that you'll be able to get anything that anybody wants. All right. I dislike it when people say these sorts of things because we have been here before. Wizards of the Coast has tried to make a three-dimensional virtual tabletop. They tried to do so during 4E, and they did not succeed. I believe this time round they will succeed because they are actually enlisting a company that was already in the process of making a three-dimensional virtual tabletop, and they knew it. And they knew that they were on the right track, and they were pretty well, they'd got it right. I don't think they're going to stuff it up this time. I think they will actually be able to release their three-dimensional virtual tabletop. It will cost a bucket load of money to develop. It will take a bit of time. But ultimately, there is no way they can release it this time and not have it ready for the new rule set. There is no way they can make the same mistake they did with 4E. So is the three-dimensional virtual tabletop going to change Dungeons & Dragons forever? No. No, it's not. And I will explain, because I have a lot of notes here. The three-dimensional virtual tabletop just won't change Dungeons & Dragons forever, but Wizards of the Coast would like it to think that it will, and is certainly banking on it doing that because they are putting so much money into it. You've also got to realize that there are plenty of third-party publishers that have made three-dimensional virtual tabletops successfully, And frankly, they did not corner the market. In fact, two-dimensional virtual tabletops still dominate the market rather than the three-dimensional tabletop platforms. So just because you make something three-dimensional doesn't mean you corner the market and you change the landscape completely. The three-dimensional virtual tabletop, it looks very cool. I agree. It's very impressive. And it looks like a very fancy video game. Like they said that it isn't, we want to make it sure it doesn't look like a video game. It does look like a video game. Okay, we're not stupid. We understand this. Does that mean that the virtual tabletop, the three-dimensional virtual tabletop, will have subscription fees attached to it? Absolutely. And microtransactions for sure. Why? Well, because the platform D&D Beyond, which is where it's going to be, already has subscription fees. It already has microtransactions for their book products, their adventures, their supplements for characters and backgrounds. Like, it's all there already. So that is going to happen for sure. Has that changed the landscape for Dungeons and Dragons completely by doing that? No, but a lot of people have had the money and have the desire to have it digitally rather than a physical book, which is fine. Now, what about the users of a three-dimensional virtual tabletop? They're going to encounter some fairly significant computer hardware power issues because a three-dimensional virtual tabletop requires quite a bit of additional cost. You have to have a pretty powerful graphics card, which I do have and some people do have, but I can assure you that the vast majority of our population playing the game will not. Now, I know there are plenty of people out there who play video games and they have very powerful graphics cards to play those video games. But there are plenty of people who play video games that don't play on a computer. They play on something that's much cheaper to afford, such as an Xbox or a PlayStation, even though those are pretty expensive. But certainly significantly, consoles are very, very cheap in comparison to a computer doing the same job. Your computer processor unit and the number that you need to have will be completely outrageous. Like, you will need to have quite a few. A lot of you with old computers will not be able to run this. The memory, the short-term memory usage, not so much the long-term memory usage, not the hard space, but certainly your RAM is going to be a bit of an issue with regard to actually running this thing. The internet load for a three-dimensional virtual tabletop will mean that your users are going to require an upgrade to their internet plan. So whatever provider is giving you right now, you're probably not going to have enough coming through. It's going to have to be a bit better. So that's another additional cost. A three-dimensional virtual tabletop will be expensive at multiple sources. So only those of you who are quite wealthy and have the disposable income to be able to purchase it will be using it. Okay? So there's going to be a lot of pricing issues. Now, the thing is that the three-dimensional virtual tabletop and even virtual tabletops, they run into the same problems, but certainly a three-dimensional tabletop runs into the same pricing problem as the issue of buying miniatures, because there are plenty of people out there who cannot afford to buy miniatures. There's plenty of us who can, but a lot of people who can't. And so they do not play with miniatures because of the expense. Instead, they use pen and pencil, or they utilize a free virtual tabletop, essentially. They might still need to have an internet connection and a computer, which they probably already had before, but they use a two-dimensional virtual tabletop to try to do what the miniatures and maps did. But there's no cost because there are plenty of services out there that do that, okay? So people playing a two-dimensional virtual tabletop already have significant issues running anything in terms of a game. So don't expect D&D Beyond's three-dimensional virtual tabletop to be exempt from the problems of running a virtual tabletop in terms of the server crashing, in terms of there being bugs and glitches and all sorts of things, or things just not working out at your end because you have a storm and your internet is just in and out too much that you can't actually run the table properly. Okay, there's also been the comment that third-party publishers are going to go out of business, that third-party content creators are going to be significantly affected. Well, yes, some third-party content creators are going to be affected, particularly if they need to make 3D models to work on this three-dimensional virtual tabletop. And certainly if you're trying to deal with a map that's three-dimensional, then again, you may have some third-party creators who can't deal with that. But again, I would like to point out, it's not going to be as many people as you might think, okay? Why is that? Because two-dimensional virtual tabletops are not going to die. They are going to remain. They are going to be here for a long time. Now, the use of something like Roll20, not so much Fantasy Grounds and some of the other ones, but Roll20 in particular, and other two-dimensional virtual tabletops that are free. They often have pay versions, but they have a free version as well. They prosper. Why do they prosper? Well, they prosper because they are free. Like, people can sign up to them and use what is there. They might not be able to get everything, but they can do enough, okay? And people are now able to avoid the cost of buying miniatures and battle mats and so forth, and terrain. So that's why people often use those tools. Now, there's another problem with thinking that the three-dimensional virtual tabletop is going to take over completely, and that is some people don't like playing online. Like, there's a lot of people who the only way they will play is in person, or if they will play online, it's the one experience they hate the most, and they want to go back to playing in their lounge, in their dining room, in person, and they don't want to be on a Zoom call or on a Discord call or something like that. There are plenty of people who just don't like using a virtual tabletop. Even if they play online, they don't want to use a virtual tabletop. They use theatre of the mind. And then, of course, to transition some people to three-dimensional virtual tabletop, it's not going to work. There will be plenty of people who love it. But no, I can assure you that the three-dimensional virtual tabletop that is being developed for D&D Beyond or Dungeons & Dragons will not change the landscape forever and not dominate the entire hobby. Let's see how we're doing here. I am going to just take a drink of water. And I want to... Yeah, radio beer. I've heard of it, yes. There are a lot of people who use it. It's not just about the Dungeon Master having a shitty connection. Like, everybody's can affect the whole thing. But yes, I'm releasing that comment since it got locked. Okay, so I can see there's a lot of comments with regard to this, but we need to... Hello, Wally. Now, Wally and me are going to be doing a Dungeon Master Roundtable on Esper's channel very shortly, but I need to get these questions answered, don't I? Hey, Wally, let's get this done. Right, next question. For those of you who are hoping that I would talk about some of the other stuff, I absolutely will. But as I said, I'm going to take my time as I work my way through this. And I'm probably going to wind up drinking a lot of water because I'm talking a lot. Okay, the D20 test. Here we go. 1D&D's D20 test. I know what they're trying to do here. So now an ability check, a skill check, a saving throw, an attack roll, they're all classified as a D20 test. Okay. There's always been D20 rolls, D20 checks, D20 saving throws, and essentially a D20 test. It's just terminology. But what is interesting about doing this is that they are kind of... The intention behind it, I believe, is to have all of these follow the same rules, because they don't necessarily follow exactly the same rules. There are some things that are different. Why is that? Tradition, probably. But let's go into this a bit more. A D20 test is basically it's going to be restricted. Now, they've actually specified in the wording, okay, that your target number needs to be no less than 5. 5 is a very easy task. So why the heck are you rolling a 5 in the first place is I don't understand at all. Why you're rolling even a 10, which is an easy task. Again, why would you bother rolling this? And then your target number can't be any more than 30. Why are they saying this? Now, 30 is near impossible, so anything greater than 30 is impossible to actually do. Yeah? Does that follow in terms of logic? I think it's logical. Now, likely, I believe the reason that they are stipulating that the target numbers need to be between 5 and 30 is because of this. It's likely because players have exploited the character's numbers. There are plenty of ways of doing it, whether it be armor class, whether it be a ability check, or not so much a saving throw, that's much harder to do, but certainly skill checks and dealing with attack rolls and armor class and stuff like that. I can see where they're going with this. There's another thing and another problem that's probably occurred, which wouldn't surprise me, and I know it does happen because I've heard people talk about it, and that is Dungeon Masters expanding their testing range. The range was stipulated in 5e to be 5 to 30. But there are Dungeon Masters out there that make DCs that are less than 5 and DCs that are greater than 30. And this is a carry-on from older versions of Dungeons and Dragons when we did this with 4e because of the way the maths worked and how characters were structured. We did this back in 3.5 and 3. So I can understand where those Dungeon Masters and even those players are coming from, but they have failed to understand the range exists, even if you don't use 5s and 10s, to give you a benchmark for what the difficulty of a task is. And you stick between the numbers because actually that makes far more sense. It means that higher level characters will always be better at doing things and lower level characters will always be not as good. Okay? Frankly, for me, I think the Dungeons and Dragons 1 or 1 D&D D20 test range should probably be 11, which is greater than easy, through to 30. 11 to 30 would be much smarter. It makes more sense to me. Just because a 5 is very easy and 10 is easy. Why would you bother getting somebody to roll a check for something like that? It doesn't make any sense. It's like we've taken our brain and thrown it into the garbage tin. So one of the aspects of doing this is, and I think this is probably where they're trying to go in many respects, and that is less reliance on the D20 roll to determine success and failure. Okay, this is what we need to actually understand. It's not in the rules, but there needs to be less reliance on a 20-sided dice roll to determine whether you succeed or you fail in every single situation. There needs to be some better guidance from Wizards of the Coast, and there needs to be an acceptance by players and Dungeon Masters that there will be situations where they shouldn't actually need to roll the dice. And we're still working this way. I'm working through this. There are a lot of people who are new to the game, but even people who've been playing for a long time don't actually fall within the, well, there are times when I don't need to roll the dice. And they roll dice for everything. Okay? So that's part of what's going on here with the D20 test. We are working our way into the more contentious issues. I deliberately left them near the end? Kind of. I have. Yeah. Yes, Josh, I got your email. I just not have had time to actually answer it. Okay. Let's start talking about one of the more problematic issues that people really despise, and that's rolling the 1. Like that seems to be cropping up a lot. So let's talk about rolling that 1. Okay. Rolling the 1. So Wizards of the Coast's 1D&D has done something that really surprised me, and it's shocked a lot of people, and that is rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice. Now, rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice is failure for an ability check, a skill check, an attack roll, and a saving throw. Because it only used to be an attack roll. Why only an attack roll? Tradition. Essentially, tradition. You could say it's about game balance, but Dungeons & Dragons doesn't have game balance. You cannot put game balance into a game with too many moving parts like this. It just doesn't work. And Dungeons and Dragons is a game that works on a d20 with so much variation that balance is not a part of it. You are playing a gambling game. So when I saw them do this, I thought, that's very simple. That's very elegant. That's a very elegant mechanical adjustment. And in my opinion, it's about time. So I am very biased with regard to this. Now, why am I biased with regard to this? Well, I was thinking back to all the times that I've been playing 5e or Dungeons and Dragons, and people would have arguments, particularly in 5e, about rolling a 1. Because the assumption was, when people were told when you were new, is if you rolled a 1 on an attack roll, you missed, you failed. And then they would translate that information to any other 20-sided dice roll. Well, it would make sense that you failed with everything else. And so people are already playing this way because it actually makes sense. It actually makes sense. It's consistent. It's simple. It's easy to understand. And for me, I think that's actually a great thing. It makes it much easier for me to explain the rules to somebody by doing it this way. But there are some problems that people have put forward. And that is, what about a player that has built their character with high numerical numbers so that they never fail? They can't possibly fail. Even if under the current rules they roll a 1, they can't fail at all. You know? So now they could fail under this new rule system, even though they have a 20 or a 25 and modifier and they're adding it to a 20-sided dice roll. They roll that 1 and they've got like a 5% chance that everything goes poof for them. Now you've got to understand that the player we're talking about that's building the character that does this is playing like Munchkin. That's power gaming. You can call it optimizing, but it's power gaming. It's the same thing. Power gaming, optimizing. I know people like to differentiate it, but really it is a big nerve for them, the way they're playing. Is that actually bad? Is it in fact bad? Because there's a whole part of our community who looks for just holes and loopholes to get around things. And this has been one of them, is like, how do you make your number so good that you can't fail anything? But I would ask you this. If you have a character who is proficient with something and has a very high number in something, why is the Dungeon Master requiring a D20 test or a 20-sided dice roll for that particular character who has a very high skill in it? If they are that good at it, why are they required to make a dice roll? Why can't they simply do it correctly? Okay, you eliminate the dice roll. It's like many things. Like if you are so good at something, it makes sense that if you are highly skilled that you shouldn't have to make a dice roll. Whereas somebody who is unskilled and has no idea what they're doing and they're not very good at it, then they would have a pretty good chance of failing. So you make a dice roll for them. This is really about the Dungeon Master deciding there are times when it makes sense that they roll the dice and times when it makes sense that they don't roll the dice. Also too, rolling a 1 under the new system, this D20 test, rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice roll is not a critical fumble. It doesn't mean that you will drop your weapon, throw it over the fence, or break it, or stab your allies. It's not a critical fail. It's just a failure. It's not a critical fail. So don't worry about that. Don't expect anything other than a house rule to turn this into a critical fail, because right now it's not a critical fail. So you don't need to worry about rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice, in my opinion. I think this is more about the way that we adjudicate how we deal with that. You may have noticed I am slowly but surely getting to the landmines that are these discussions. Okay, so Agile Monk is here, Dinomancer is here. So Agile Monk is a patron, by the way. Thank you for being here. Hello, Scott. Right, let's move on to the next one, shall we? Because apparently nobody wants to break this stuff down, and I have gone to a lot of effort to do this. A lot of this was collected by the community, by the way. They presented their arguments. I tried to find a counter. In some cases, I actually could not, and I actually had to come up with something else, much to my surprise. It does happen sometimes where things do actually look like a legitimate problem, and so you have to actually come up with something. Okay, so let's talk about rolling a 20, because core blimey, did that open a can of worms as well. Let's press record there. Here we go. So 1D&D. 1D&D has tried to introduce the idea, and its playtest material, that rolling a 20 on a 20-sided dice is a success, automatic success. So that rolling a 20 on a 20-sided dice is an automatic success for an ability check, a skill check, an attack roll, and a saving throw. And in the past, it's only been an attack roll. Again, it's tradition. It hasn't worked that way because that's traditionally what we've done. Again, I will say, I think it's simple. I think it's an elegant mechanical adjustment. And in my opinion, I'm glad they've done it, because for the same reasons we used to get into arguments about, well, if I roll a 20, I should be able to succeed. Right? Has anybody had a situation occur when you have allowed a player to make a dice roll and their modifier was so bad that even if they rolled a 20 on that dice, they could not possibly succeed, because the actual DC for success was 25 or 30 or some number that was out of their reach, because they either had a negative modifier or they only were adding like a 1 or 2. Right? Has it happened to you? I know it's happened to me more than once. And you run into this, I've rolled a 20, okay, but I still do not succeed. And you can see their face just change. This is sort of a product, not necessarily a fault of a dungeon master, because you won't necessarily know what the modifier of your characters are to know whether they can actually succeed or fail before asking for that check. So sometimes it's just a legitimate confusion. Like, I did not realize you only had a +1 or +2, and yet the DC is at 25, so you can't succeed under the current rules. Now you need to start thinking to yourself, well, here's the problem, Fred. If we have a D20 be an automatic success on a 20-sided dice roll, no matter what it is, what does that mean? Does it actually mean that players have their character perform ridiculous and impossible tasks? No. No, it doesn't. No. Why? Because we, 1, are going to stay within the 5 to 30 range, and 2, we probably need to make sure that if a player can't succeed on something, that we never actually have them roll. Like, if you can't succeed on a task, no matter what the modifier is that the player has, then you can't succeed because you won't roll the dice. It's really simple. Dungeon masters already have to contend with players wanting to perform ridiculous tasks and actions using the 5e rules or 5.5 rules. Okay, it already exists. It already happens. It happens to me. I've seen it happen to other people. It's not like it's a new thing. So by making the 20 an automatic success hasn't actually changed much of that at all. It's really now down to a dungeon master having to take control of when you roll the dice, when it's appropriate, when it's not, and using the guidance and parameters that a 5 and a 30 is the range that we work with. Okay? And even if you can't get a 30, the 20 represents the unlikely possibility that you may still succeed. Okay? You still might succeed, but then again, as a dungeon master, you can control that aspect by simply not allowing a dice roll. So it's not really going to change everything, but it certainly makes the whole rule system super simple to understand. Do you get my point? Is it clear what I'm trying to say here with regard to this? Have I answered the question and presented an argument that you think is reasonable? You'll let me know, I'm sure. Okay. We are getting into the landmines. There it is. I can see it right now. It's the critical hit. Holy Toledo, the critical hit. Who would have thought that changing the critical hit would cause so much trouble? Wizards of the Coast knew it was going to cause trouble. I can assure you right now. right? They knew it was going to happen. And they were pretty clear in the video that they put out that they knew that this was probably going to get some flack. Like, they are certainly doing some big experiments. But that's right. That's what a playtest is for. Can I just say that the critical hit rule that they've put forward is probably less about marketing and more about let's see what we can get away with. Anyway, let's cover that topic now. 1D&D now has decided to change critical hits, and quite a significant change it is, because now critical hits only apply to player characters and not to monsters controlled by the Dungeon Master or the non-player characters or NPCs, which actually makes characters even stronger than they were before and nerfs the monsters. Now, I have a personal bias with this, even though I probably play more than I Dungeon Master. Much to your surprise, I bet. I hate this because this is a marketing thing. But their approach to put this out, although it is a marketing thing, it is also, I think their approach is going to be very much around true playtesting. They are going to be very careful about making this a change in the rules going forward, because they know it could sink them pretty badly. It's a rule that you could wind up having in a game that nobody uses, right? Not only have they said that only player characters can only critical hit, only weapon and unarmed strikes can critical hit, which again, it's actually favouring the martial classes. There's an attempt to try and rebalance here, but it's actually probably not necessary, because now spells can't critical hit. If you have an attack roll for a spell, and this is only critical hits will only work with an attack roll, whether it be a ranged attack, a melee attack, a spell attack at range, or a melee attack, it would only ever affect those, right? But now you can't actually critical hit with a spell that makes an attack roll, or a spell that has saving throws will never be affected. And probably the strongest spells in the game are the ones with a saving throw in terms of damage output. Right? They usually do the most. So now you have spells no longer hitting, no critical hit with a spell, and it's going to affect the weaker spells. Like, essentially, single target spells are attack spells. Yep. It's going to affect any kind of attack roll spell, and again, they tend to be single target, and they tend to be the weakest spells out there. Not only that, most of the time when you're using these, it's going to be cantrips that are going to be affected. Cantrips don't actually do very much. Yes, there is a scaling process. You do get more dice as you level up, but it's still not going to make any significant difference compared to a martial class who's probably got, at later levels, 4 or 5 attacks. You know what I mean? They've got extra attack, so they've got even greater chance of being able to critical hit than a spellcaster. This was actually totally unnecessary by Wizards of the Coast. And I don't understand why they thought they needed to do this, because it doesn't rebalance things, really. No. The balance issue between martial and spellcasters is that spellcasters can do stuff outside of combat that's really cool, and martials often don't have those sorts of things. That's the real trouble, yeah? And martials can't usually affect great areas, and spellcasters can. Those are the key problems that people pull up, is like, we can't compete. Yes, understood. Only weapon dice are doubled now with a critical hit. So no sneak attack damage or smite damage. This definitely nerfs the rogue. It definitely nerfs the paladin critical hits. I'm going to say right now that they were pretty good at doing that sort of thing, and they could do it a lot. It is possible, if you rolled multiple critical hits on one turn with a paladin, to carve things up. A rogue, it was a lot more difficult. It was a lot more difficult to pump out the kind of damage. Paladins really just got hit pretty hard, and they were certainly exploited. You could hit a single target and take it down in one blow. If you critical hit and smite at the same time with your paladin, something would die. So I would say now what they've done compared to everything else, they have made the critical hit rules even more complicated, significantly more complicated. It's kind of moronic, actually. Even if I agree with some of the concepts behind it, it's moronic because it just made it far more complicated with the changes they put in place. And it's not consistent with the design philosophy of 5e and the design philosophy that they have been saying they are putting forward, trying to keep it simple. So they've tried to make other things simpler, and this is one time when they haven't. Now, here's the answer they have had with regard to monsters. Are all monsters really going to get a recharge feature rather than being able to critical hit? No, they're not. I doubt it. It's very unlikely. Even in 4E, when we had recharge, it was not uncommon to forget to roll for the recharge or even realize that you had a recharge ability. I mean, that is an issue with regard to dungeon mastering, maybe my dungeon mastering. But not every monster is going to have a recharge feature, so you can't present that as an argument as a balance aspect. The other thing that they've mentioned is the reason for doing this is that if players are low level, they can be killed by a critical hit by a monster. Yes, they can, but how long are you level 1, level 2, or level 3? This is really the danger zone, is level 1, level 2, and level 3. If you're going to die in 5e or any Dungeons & Dragons game that's played currently, it's probably in those levels. And after that, you're probably not. So, and here's the thing. There are easier ways to deal with the fact that you don't want your characters to die, if that's what you want to do as a dungeon master. So, not only that, you've actually made the process of a monster affecting the scale of a combat significantly harder. Like, it's harder to challenge your players because you do this. We all know this. Now, no dungeon master is going to agree to this new change in critical hits. As it sits, I find it very unlikely there'd be a tiny population of dungeon masters who will agree to the critical hits the way they have presented them, unless they are a Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League dungeon master, and they won't have a choice. If this becomes print, which it hasn't become print yet, and they are testing the waters very much, okay? Players that like playing paladins and rogues will hate this new change to critical hits. It is going to annoy the player base significantly. So the feedback on this is probably not going to be very positive. I also want to point out that why does a paladin smite ability have to be powered by something like spell slots and then interact with a critical hit? Is there no better way to deal with a paladin smite ability? There is, I'm sure there is. They just haven't put it forward. There's no point having spell slots if the only thing you ever use it on is smiting. So they just need to retool the paladin to make that work. Now, I'm going to say that I think the rogue got the short end of the stick. A rogue is significantly nerfed by not being able to double the sneak attack damage dice. And they only get one attack, generally, unless you multi-class. And there is a tendency by people to multi-class into Paladin for the smite and into Rogue for the sneak attack because of the interplay with the critical hit. Like, it's done deliberately. And then if you can find some way of improving your critical range, then that's even better. I've seen it happen. People have built those sorts of characters at my table. It does exist. So messing with those two classes might actually be a very sensible thing to do, and maybe the way that they deal with that is we get a playtest that retools them to compensate for the problem. But again, it's too late because players will be already pissed off by it and they are not going to say yes to this. I would say that the best way to deal with a critical hit is actually to leave it the way it was, but make this one change, and that is critical hits need to just do maximum damage. Skip the doubling the dice mechanic so that people get consistent, reliable damage results, like they did in 4E. It's a mechanic from 4E. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it means you don't need to worry about, I just rolled a critical hit. I rolled my 2 dice. I'm doubling my dice in this case, and I roll 1 on all of my dices. And you go and tell the dungeon master that you did 2 points of damage off the dice, and 3 points of damage off your modifier, and you just made a critical hit, and the total damage was 5. And it's depressing as. And it does happen. I've seen it happen. Just make it consistent. I can assure you that power gamers, when they can deal with consistent rules, they actually probably prefer that over things that have lots of variable aspects to them. And actually, it makes it super simple. Super simple. Here's the other problem is so many people are using different types of critical hit rules right now that aren't the standard official ones, that you cannot go and mess with it this much and not wind up finding that nobody uses it anyway. So I can tell you now, there's no way that the critical hit rules are going to survive the playtest round 1. I doubt it very much. Okay. I am going to have another drink of water, and we're moving into danger zone. This is probably my favorite thing to talk about. Inspiration. Because inspiration is already a problem, right? Okay, I want to talk about this right now as like, in fact, I would have to say that critical hit process should probably have more variant rule options. Whatever the official critical rules are, you should probably have a whole list of variant rules that people can use and swap in and out. Like that would be the best way to go. And it's kind of where we're going with the next one, actually. I'm going to enjoy talking about this one. Inspiration. The most despised mechanic and an altered and changed mechanic there is in the game. God almighty, core blimey, it is one of those things that they had their heart in the right place and the intention was great and it just didn't work. I hope I have more water because I'm going to need it. Okay, let's deal with this inspiration problem that people are having. So 1D&D has now decided to change inspiration, and apparently they're trying to make inspiration more used than it is right now. Okay, so here's the thing. The original rules for earning inspiration in the player's handbook is awful. So what people have done is they ignore those rules or they change them for their game. That's what happened. You'll find that players do not like having to play to their floor so that they can get a roll advantage at a later date. Like, you serious? Well, here's the thing. I think the intention behind it was that when the players did something that was playing to their floor and they had to roll a 20-sided dice that was related to that the Dungeon Master would give them inspiration and they would use it and get advantage for that roll. Like it would be used right then and there. I think that's what the design team was really going for. But there has also been the discussion of banking it and putting it aside and using it and saving it to be used during that session, which of course caused all sorts of other problems. So right now, the inspiration rules in the player's handbook don't get used or have been changed significantly by the vast community that we have. They have just ignored it completely. So doing anything with this is a silly thing to mess with, frankly, because I think they did not figure out what they needed to do with inspiration. I despise the idea of awarding inspiration to a player for rolling a natural 20 on a 20-sided dice. I am biased to that. Why? Because it's an unnecessary reward for being lucky already, and it can be, in some tables, be exploited by players who will try to force more dice rolls into the game if a Dungeon Master is not aware of the issue. Now, this has been put forward as like, it's not just the D20. I dislike it in two parts. One, because why reward somebody for already being lucky? Getting the natural 20 was good enough. Natural 20 now means automatic success. You got enough. Okay. Now, next thing is, can it be exploited by players? Well, only if Dungeon Masters are new and are unaware that they probably should not allow for everything to be rolled. Like, if a player says, can I make a perception check? Can I do this? Can I do that? And you're allowing them to roll a dice every single time. We do have passive checks, people. You do not need to have them roll a dice every single time they do something. So you can actually, the Dungeon Master can control the number of times that a 20-sided dice gets rolled in their game. Like this dice here, you decide when it gets rolled. So actually, yes, players may try to exploit it, but you have control of this. You just need to make some decisions. Frankly, I think it probably makes more sense if you're going to have a dice roll involved to award inspiration for rolling a 1. Why would we do that? Primarily because I feel like a heel and bad for a player because they constantly failing everything, and rolling a 1 sucks. Now, I'm not suggesting that the inspiration be used when you've rolled the 1, but you use it later, okay? Or have a variant roll that says, yes, when you roll a 1, I'm going to give you inspiration so you can re-roll it, which essentially means you would never be able to fail anything on a 1, which would defeat the purpose of rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice. So I'm not suggesting that's an idea, but I know it would work for some people. Can I just say that the rationale for actually changing inspiration and trying to hard bake it into other parts of the game will just get those options banned or changed by Dungeon Masters. Right now, it's not going to work. Now, the criteria for awarding inspiration is bizarre, frankly. Okay? What I would say to you is there was another part on the play test that said that a Dungeon Master can award inspiration for a player for anything they think they did that was worthy. And that is probably where we need to be, because that's what people are doing now. They've already acknowledged that that's what people are doing now. What is the smartest thing to do? How do you award inspiration in your game? You simply have a list of suggestions for a Dungeon Master in terms of awarding inspiration. Trying to hand it over to the game mechanics so that players have control of earning and getting inspiration is probably the wrong way to go. Because I know that if I have a human that gets inspiration after a long rest every single day, I'm probably going to remove that. Now, that's just me. Will other Dungeon Masters do that? Not necessarily. It's only 1 dice roll, right? Is it going to be a big issue? So, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think. The reality is the community is running inspiration however the hell they like. So it won't matter what the design team are doing. Somehow the design team have assumed that players not using inspiration, this is why they've said this is why they're changing it, that players not using inspiration is because they're saving it for an important dice roll, they're saving it for the big bad, they're saving it for when they really think they need it. When in fact, I think, and my players have said this, all of them have said this to me multiple times, and I've heard this from other people as well that I've played with, I think the reason that players don't use inspiration when they get it is because they forget they have it. They just forget. And when playing online, it's hard to remember that you have it. Whereas before we were placing a big dice in front of somebody to say, you have inspiration. So this is to remind you you can use it. I think players forget to use inspiration. I also think that their characters have become so powerful, they don't think they need inspiration. The only time they would do it is, well, I'm a rogue and I need to have advantage in this situation to be able to use my sneak attack. Then I would use it. Other than that, most of the time, all those characters are killing the monsters so quickly, they don't need to worry about rolling with advantage. Really. My players have told me this more than once, the whole lot. Multiples have told me this. It's a real thing. Trust me, people, it's a real thing. I could be on the wrong track here, but I think I'm right. I think they've come to the wrong conclusion. Now, losing inspiration when you start a long rest is much better than the players having to use their inspiration during the current game session, because sometimes you would get awarded inspiration at the end of the game session and there's never an opportunity to actually use the dice roll. And apparently you can't bank it. Now, the reason that we have this here, the session thing, is actually a product of Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League. It's so that it can be easily tracked, like you have to use it during that session, okay? It's all about Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League. Not all of us are playing that game. We don't care about that if we're playing a home game. So we don't need to worry about that, okay? What I would say is, why do we need to lose inspiration at all? when you earn or get awarded inspiration, why do you even have to lose it? Because it creates issues around the players and the dungeon masters trying to find the right opportunity to use it. And you can eliminate that by just saying you keep it until you use it. I am fine with restricting player characters to having one inspiration at a time and not allowing it to stack, because you could potentially stack that up and power up a character or the entire party if you wanted to when you're dealing with a big bad and just, the climax becomes a non-event. So I understand doing that. But if you have everybody at the table with inspiration and they only have one, then that's a little bit easier to contend with than everybody having stacked up 5 or 6 inspirations to deal with the main villain, which would be a problem if they all decide to use it all at once to make sure that they have maximum carnage. Okay? I would say to you, don't worry about losing inspiration. You keep it until you use it. It might even be better to make inspiration a party resource. So even though a player character or a character might earn it for whatever they do, or a player might earn it for bringing pizza or whatever the heck it is, like everybody has all sorts of different criteria for earning inspiration, it might be better to say, like, anybody in the group can use that inspiration. We kind of already have that. Like, you can give your inspiration to somebody else to give them an advantage on a dice roll. You can do that now. So, yeah, make it a party resource. It'll get used, just not necessarily. And if you can put all the dice on the table in a bowl, you might actually remember that you have them. You just pick up a dice when you need to use it, and it's gone. And of course, some players will use more of it than others. But yes, ultimately, it will not matter what they do with inspiration, because right now, everybody's ignoring what they did in the past anyway, so nothing they do for the future is going to change diddly squat. Okay, I need to grab some more water. That's not going to work. No, that's not going to work either. All right, so, hello, Pack Tactics. How are you? I can assure you, Pack Tactics, that I will be saying something that you don't agree with, okay? And I will be saying things that everybody here probably doesn't agree with at some point. It's going to happen, okay? We are in a totally different way of thinking, but I'm going to stick to inspiration is just a dungeon master tool, and we just leave it there, frankly, because that's what's going to happen anyway. You kind of have, as a designer, you need to realize when the players and the dungeon masters have taken control of the game and they don't give a shit about what you do. And this is one of those times. All right, so let's talk about the next big thing. And actually, this is the unarmed strike. And I know I'm supposed to be doing this a lot faster, but we're doing all right for time. I'm not out of time yet. Okay, all right, so let's talk about this one here. Okay, all right, so unarmed strikes, very complicated. Actually, I got quite confused. It actually presented me with a series of questions that I didn't expect I would need to answer, and came to a conclusion that how do I say this? So one D&D has changed unarmed strikes, and what they've tried to do is streamline it and make it more consistent and easier to run. Like, that's essentially what they're trying to do. Okay, so a special attack like the grapple and the shove, they now work as an unarmed strike rather than using an ability check or a skill check as a contest. In the past, we'd use a contest. I can assure you that explaining to people how a contest works in Dungeons and Dragons confuses many people. Maybe not everybody, but I can assure you it confuses a lot of people. So what they've done is tried to make this action super simple, which I think is awesome. Have they made the right choice? That's a different question. Okay, I'll get back to that. Escaping a grapple is no longer an action. It no longer requires your action. So it requires an action to actually put the grapple on, but to escape the grapple, and most of the time it is going to be your characters escaping from a monster's grapple rather than the other way around, okay? This actually makes the grappling process a lot weaker. It makes no sense to me, frankly, because I know getting out of a grapple is actually very difficult. Once you are grappled, it's actually very difficult. You probably will not have time or energy to do very much of anything else other than, I got free. The reason it exists is to eliminate that action, is that people want to be able to escape the grapple and then make an attack because they feel like they have wasted their turn. This is catering to the population who play mainly as characters and aren't dungeon masters. And frankly, I think this is, again, going to be more of a nerf for monsters, making monsters easier to deal with, particularly when they have a grapple aspect to them, okay? The grapple condition now imposes disadvantage on attack rolls. Thank God for that, because so many people were so confused why there was actually a grapple condition and a restrained condition. I consider this a refinement. It's welcome, in my opinion. I'm very biased with regard to this. Only do I enjoy the idea of doing this if the restrained condition gets deleted completely. Like, get rid of it. Frankly, I think a better choice with regard to the grappled condition is to shove it down the toilet and flush it away. I would replace the grappled condition with just the restrained condition. Anything that the grappled condition does, the restrained condition does, and it would reduce so much confusion. You do not need to have so many conditions. It's not necessary. It would actually be a much smarter way of dealing with the game. Now, the new mechanic for shove and grapple makes defenses more dependent, or your defenses far more dependent on dexterity scores or modifiers and your armor class. Your armor class becomes significantly more important because of this, right? Because now we're attacking armor class rather than dealing with a contest. Well, the issue is grapple and shove using an attack roll against armor class means that, commoners and ogres have essentially a very similar armor class. Yet their strength and ability to grapple is probably very different. Very, very different. I think this is where the hole lies with using armor class as our target. Okay? It might in fact be better to use a strength saving throw to engage in a grapple or a shove, and to break it. A strength saving throw to break it. This sort of reflects the fact that grappling and shoving requires physical power and strength, and it also, grappling is one of those things where it's actually not just strength. If you have ever done any martial arts, you know that grappling involves the combination of strength, dexterity, and training. In real life, that's how it works. Plus surprise, because it's very hard to put a grapple onto somebody who knows it's coming. Usually you lose that battle unless you know what you're doing. Surprise is very important. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work. You can't capture every aspect of real life in the grapple, frankly. I was actually thinking, after I had finished my notes, that one of the best ways to deal with the grapple might be to choose between making a strength saving throw or a dexterity saving throw. Because if you've ever fought somebody who's really strong, it is possible for somebody who's very small and weak, but very fast, to grapple somebody and tie them up. This has happened to me when dealing with women and small children. So I think that might actually be a solution. You pick whichever one is the highest, because somebody who's very strong will rely on their strength when they're grappling, and somebody who's very quick will not be relying on their strength. They'll be relying on their dexterity, their speed. And that's probably a better way of addressing the grapple. And again, we're not having to deal with the complexity of a contest. We're only dealing with a DC, and it's a saving throw. And that's it. I still think you need to use your action to escape a grapple. I think that's probably needs to stay. But that's just me. Now, I've heard people say, well, Fred, here's the problem. What do you do with athletics if you're not using it for grappling and shoving these special attacks? Well, yeah, you've eliminated some of the combat aspects, but D&D is not just combat, is it? The athletic skill is actually used for jumping. Not always, but certainly for some jumps where you don't actually get like automatic success. There are situations where if your strength is 15 and the gap you're jumping across and you have a running jump and it's 15 feet, you don't have to roll any dice. But if you don't have a strength of 15 and you're crossing a space that's 15 feet, your dungeon master is probably going to use some sort of dice check, right? So we use it for jumping. We definitely use it for climbing. We definitely use it for swimming. And sports activities don't come up that often, but they do exist. They do come into play. Arm wrestling, if you're having an arm wrestle. Lifting objects, though. It actually makes sense that we don't just use a strength check to lift something, that we actually use athletics. Because if you've ever done any powerlifting or weight training, you know that knowing how to lift something heavy is part of the battle. It's not just about physical strength, it's about how your technique, and athletics would reflect that far more, right? So athletics is not a dead skill. In fact, I would say out of the skills, perception would be at the top, followed by athletics, because you're going to use it a lot. It will come up. It just might not come up in combat that much. Yep. So that is what I thought I would present with regard to the unarmed strike. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with the unarmed strike for it to work in its current form, because right now, I think they're on the right track. They just haven't hit the right medium. Yeah. Okay. All right. I need to drink some water. We've got just the last little tidbits, and then I am finished, and hopefully I have some of my voice left. Yes, for those of you who don't know, Wally DM has a YouTube channel that does puzzles and traps, and you should definitely check him out. And you should certainly check him out on Esper the Bard's channel in about 40 minutes. All right, okay. So let's talk about the next one, which I'm kind of glad that they made a change to the long rest. Frankly, making a change to the long rest has actually cleaned up things that I struggled with, which frankly I should have been able to sort out myself. We have in my group. So 1D&D has made some changes to the long rest, but actually it's a very minor adjustment. In fact, there are very few changes to the long rest. There's only one that really stands out, because I looked at the wording and it's essentially the same thing. The only thing that's different is that when you take a long rest, you can achieve a short rest if you have been resting during that long rest for at least 1 hour, and you get all of the benefits of a short rest. Okay, this has been an argument point. This has been something we have had arguments at my table with regard to. I'm taking a long rest, but we've only got 1 or 2 hours into the long rest before it's been interrupted. So do we get the benefits of a short rest? The problem is you have to make the decision to actually use hit dice, and you have to make the decision to use it that way because the mechanics for a short rest are actually different to the long rest. But by stating this in the long rest, it eliminates that argument. Okay? Because if you do look carefully at the updated 5e rules or 5.5 rules, you'll notice that the definition of how you do a long rest and a short rest are slightly different. And that's where the problem has always been lying. And by doing this, it actually cleans things up. Because I think that was what the designer's intent was in the first place. That is, if you had rested during your long rest long enough to have the benefit, of an hour or more, that you would get the benefits of a short rest. But they just haven't worded it that way. They've just decided to make a slight adjustment. And I think it's a smart move. Nothing else in the long rest has changed. It actually looks far more sensible than it ever looked before. I'm actually reasonably pleased with this aspect of the rules. The refinements to the long rest are much needed, frankly. Just in terms of getting to understand it, making sure it's clear, cleaning it up, it's improved a significant amount. What I'm only a little sad about, and this is my personal bias, is that the short rest is still included in the game, unfortunately. I would prefer the short rest be a variant rule, because There's just so many ways that you can reclaim hit points and rest up. I would prefer a game where my players do something and they take a long rest to get everything back, and then they go off and do the thing they want to do, and then they go and take a long rest when they're ready to take a long rest, rather than having two different types of rest type. It's one of the things that I don't like about the game, is having two different types of rest type. Okay. The last aspect is the miscellaneous stuff that I have put down, and I'm going to be pretty quick about this. Okay. Miscellaneous rules changes. There are a couple. The incapacitated condition changed to you can't speak, which makes a lot of sense, because there were some bizarre situations where a person might be unconscious, incapacitated, and they could speak still. It would crop up. It was kind of bizarre. You now have disadvantage on initiative rolls if you are incapacitated. Very sensible with regard to can't speak, related to incapacitated. I think that's a good thing to do. That actually makes sense. If you're incapacitated, you can't do anything. That's what it should be. But it's kind of odd still that we allow any kind of initiative roll when you are incapacitated. You should just go to the bottom of the initiative, because you can't do anything. What are you going to do? You're going to just lie there and just stick them at the bottom of the initiative. They don't need to roll dice. Disadvantage doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, there might be some situations that sort of crop up that sort of like mix with that, because incapacitated is linked with other conditions. Here's the problem here. There are probably 4 conditions that need to be streamlined into one. Like, do we need to really have petrified? Do we really need to have some of the other ones that are that have incapacitated tied into them? Like, it's a little bit silly, frankly. And this is one time where I would say they have probably created too many conditions in the game, and they've now created a new condition. Well, which is fine, I guess. You know, we're making refinements and we're adding a new condition. The new condition is it limits your movement. Okay, because you're slowed. It's the slowed condition. Oh, that makes sense. It grants advantage on attack rolls against slowed creatures. Okay, makes sense. Get it. Disadvantage, so you get disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. Again, makes sense. But again, it's increasing the number of conditions. And did we actually need the slowed condition in the game? Was the game able to do what it needed to do without having that there in the first place? Or is there something that we can ditch and keep the slowed condition? That would be my question. Is there a way of doing that? Spells being broken up into 3 categories, like the arcane, divine, primal. Look, I'm hoping that this means that simplifies spell casting, but I don't think it will. The problem is for full casters, where you probably won't run into too many problems. But the idea is that the wizard has a bigger spell list than everybody else. But how are you going to make this work is if every arcane spellcaster can access every spell on that list. Is it just going to be a tag? I wouldn't say this is ultimately dramatic in any way. I think half casters, how do you make that all work? Can they draw spells from the arcane and primal, or the arcane and divine, or the divine and primal? I feel like this may actually create more options for players, if that's what they do, but add a level of complexity that's actually a little bit silly. But I'm not worried too much about it, frankly, at this point. And then a character with proficiency in a skill that also has a tool proficiency related to the check they're going to make. When they apply it to the same task, that check gets advantage or automatic success. This is a concept from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It really hasn't been like a no-brainer. I mean, most of us have figured this one out. They just now have stated it in the core rules, which is probably a good thing. So this is just taking something that was very sensible and should have been stated and porting it over to the core rules. Well done. You did well, Wizards of the Coast. That was something I've been talking about in my videos quite a bit. Right. So I've been talking for a long time, And there's no way that I can go through the chat and comment on everything that you've said. Okay, so there's no way I can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the chat very, very quickly and just say hi to the people I haven't said hi to. And then I'm going to go, because then you're going to find me on Esper the Bard's channel doing a Dungeon Master Roundtable. And I will go back through your comments if I get time and see if there's anything I need to discuss. But you will use the comment section when this live stream gets published and ends. Anything that I did not talk about that I maybe didn't consider, you can put that in the comment section, and we'll see if I decide to go back and talk about this before again. But the next packet test is probably, the next 1D&D play test material is probably going to get released very soon. I wouldn't say it's going to take too long. So I said hi, big kid. I said Mike Hall, hello. I've already said hi to Dungeon Master Josh, hello. Check out his channel. Dinomancer, who's a patron, hello. TXC Boy 36, hello. How are you? Dank Smith, hello. How are you? And I'm looking through here as fast, I believe. Fendar, who is a patron, hello, Fendar. How are you doing? And I said hi to Fry Minis, Eric. Eric has a YouTube channel. Go check him out. Now moving through here, it's the same people commenting. I said hi to Wally DM, but I'll say hi again. I'm going to see you in a second. And he has a YouTube channel. You should go and check him out. And Agile Monk is a patron. Hello, Agile Monk. How's it going? Scott. Hello, Scott McClay. Hello, how are you? I'm losing my voice. Zeal. Xflow. How are you doing? Hello, welcome. And okay. And then DNF, dead. Hello, how are you? Secure. Hello, how are you too? Welcome. Hopefully this was useful to you. Did I say hi to Big Kid? Hello, Big Kid. Notorious. And MM. Hello, welcome. And no, I've done this, people. Cool, there's a lot of people who have commented. I'm glad. Pack Tactics, hello, Pack Tactics. I don't know how long you hung around. Yes, he has a YouTube channel which is far more popular than mine. Okay, so have I got everybody? I feel like Marina. Hello, Marina MA. I think I got it right. Your name. Hello, welcome. I think I got everybody. Forik. Hello, Forik. Forik is actually a patron on Wally DM's channel, and he's been following some of my stuff. I know he does. I know. So, but welcome. So, I've said hi to everybody. I need to now leave because Esper the Bard expects me to be actually showing up in his live stream now, and I am about to lose my voice. God help me. Was this a bad idea? Maybe this was. Maybe I should have no, I just leave it. But it was a mess. It was annoying me watching some of the other stuff on the channels. I'm like, oh, okay. Let's go this. And there. Got it. I have lost my voice. I've screwed myself up for the next one. I do apologize. Esper, I'm going to have to apologize big time. Okay, anyway, let's do this. So, I'm done. We've done it. We've covered everything, okay? I may have been biased with regard to things. I may have presented you with different ideas that nobody else has talked about or has already been talked about. I'm hoping that you will use the comment section in a mature manner to respond and work through this. Remember, do not panic. Don't panic, okay? Chill out, baby. Okay, only squirrels go completely nuts. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. Thank you for watching my live streams. Thank you to the patrons. Thank you for watching my videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.